He'd been mopping the floors for 12 years. No one ever asked his name. But with just one sentence, spoken in a language dead for 4,000 years, he made the entire museum freeze. An ancient stone tablet stood tall in the center of the conservation room. Its carvings ran deep. The stone chipped in places, yet its lines remained sharply etched. Surrounding it was a ring of people scholars, assistants, curators. Halogen ceiling lights shone down on each chisel mark, a harsh, sterile white. The air was thick with the scent of metal and damp paper. Anxious whispers rippled through the room. Someone tapped a keyboard. Another furrowed his brow. One person wiped their forehead with a tissue. In the corner, the old air conditioner hissed out a long, weary breath. An artifact no one could decipher. A room full of world-renowned scholars. And yet the only person who understood it was the one no one even greeted in the morning. In the darkest corner of the room, a middle-aged man was mopping the floor. The mop creaked faintly. Water bloomed across the white tiles, reflecting the overhead light in slow-moving patches. He bent down, repeating the same motion, steady, quiet, routine. From where he stood, he could see the tablet clearly. And he was watching, not blinking, not surprised, not even curious. A senior professor snapped. "Without a translation, the press will laugh us out of the building tomorrow." Another voice sighed. "I've never seen a script like this. It doesn't match any known lineage." A heavy silence blanketed the room. Someone glanced at their phone, then put it away. The lights flickered slightly. And then, a soft voice spoke. "I could give it a try." Everyone turned. Someone scoffed. A sharp exhale, part mockery, part disbelief. A young assistant frowned. The man stood there, not flinching, not timid, just upright, as if his body had grown used to being dismissed. "Sorry, you are. I'm the janitor here." It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. He stepped toward the tablet. Each footfall echoed clearly. His rubber-soled shoes, damp from mopping, made faint sticking sounds against the stone tiles, not loud, but deafening to those holding their breath. A scholar squinted. A young staffer clicked their tongue. Eyes darted to one another, silent agreement that this was absurd. But no one stopped him. He paused, placed his hand on the stone. No gloves, no hesitation. His fingers glided over the dust, stopping at a single carved symbol. "Our the Tamernon." Then he read, at first slowly, as if resyncing with an old rhythm, then evenly. The sound that emerged wasn't mere speech, it was a steady current, low and ancient, like the breath of sandstorms or the shadows of forgotten tombs. A dead language, yet it came alive in a voice no one had expected. The room froze. One scholar stepped back. The young assistant's eyes widened. Someone dropped a pen. The clatter echoed like a thunderclap in the silence. The man didn't stop. He kept reading, and at the end of the passage, he smiled. This wasn't just a hidden talent. This was the most dangerous silence you've ever overlooked. And if you think you can understand someone just by how they look, you're about to be very, very wrong. John usually arrived 30 minutes before his shift. Not for overtime. Just because he liked the quiet. He always entered through the back, a side door leading straight into the archives. The old iron door let out a soft screech each time it opened, but he didn't mind. Stepping inside, he would pause for 3 seconds in front of the statue of Horus, not out of superstition, but because the warm yellow light cast on those stone eyes made him feel calm. Each morning, he brewed a cup of ginger tea in the maintenance room. He sat in the same wooden chair with a long snake-shaped scratch on the backrest. No one else used that chair. They said it hurt their back. John said it kept his straight. He had no friends, didn't eat lunch with anyone, didn't make hallway conversation. But he knew everything: who just broke up, who was planning to quit, who only pretended to be busy when the boss walked by. No one told him these things. He just watched. Once, he saw a young scholar clutch her head and throw her pen when her translation was rejected. He stood 20 meters away, mop in hand, eyes locked on the crumpled draft at her feet. That night, after everyone had left, he picked up the paper, smoothed it gently, and placed it back on her desk. No note to the rest of Freshornen. No name. They called him the floor guy, the old mop man, Uncle John, but no one knew they were wrong. His name wasn't John, it was Jonas, named by his mother after the last priest in her Egyptian village. But when they immigrated, a customs officer misheard. From then on, every document, degrees, certificates, ID bore a name he never truly claimed. Before he became a janitor, Jonas had been a PhD candidate in linguistics at a prestigious university. His dissertation, The Evolution of Egyptian Hieroglyphics and Religious Texts, he was close to defending it. But then his father died. His mother fell ill. Jonas left the program to care for her and never returned. When his mother passed, Jonas had no scholarship, no home, no one. He applied for a janitorial job at a museum near his old campus, the same museum housing artifacts from his ancestral homeland. At first, he thought it would just be a few months, but months blurred into years, and years into a life. Some nights, when the museum lights went dark, Jonas would stand before a carved Egyptian stele, not cleaning, not translating, just watching. His lips moved soundlessly as if speaking to someone long gone. No one knew Jonas spoke 7 languages. No one knew he'd once been invited to co-author an academic textbook. No one knew he carried a folded piece of paper in his pocket, a passage in ancient Egyptian his father once read to him when he was 7. Not because he hid these things, but because no one ever asked. To everyone at the museum, John was always appropriate, never late, never nosy, never opinionated, never disruptive. But there was one thing no one ever said out loud. They didn't believe he understood what they were doing. Not because he did anything wrong, but because he worked with his hands, not with his mind. One day, while he was cleaning the Egyptian exhibit hall, 2 young scholars walked past, discussing a newly discovered carving. Their voices dropped, not out of secrecy, but because they assumed he wouldn't understand. Probably just a cheap 19th century replica. Yeah, look at those etching lines, totally amateur. Bet the old janitor here thinks it's real. Laughs. They didn't know he heard. They didn't know he had translated that exact symbol set back in 2006 in a research paper that was never published. Another time, he was asked to clean the new display room before a launch event. The showcase was covered in red velvet drapes. Under the amber lighting, everything shimmered behind a layer of ceremonial gloss. John bent down, carefully polishing the wooden frame. A journalist entered early. Seeing him, she asked casually, "Do you know what this is?" She didn't wait for an answer. A soft smile followed. "Never mind. Just curious." She turned away before he could respond. But Jonas knew. It was the Theban stele, carved with a hymn to the god Sobek. He had spent 3 years studying the curvature of those horn-shaped glyphs. A few days later, a new curator asked him to tidy up the conservation wing. As he stepped in, staff were packing a wooden crate containing a handwritten Egyptian manuscript. Jonas paused longer than usual, eyes scanning the symbols on the box. His hand stopped midair just for a second. The curator noticed. "Careful with that, sir. This is worth over $1 million. Let's not touch things we don't understand, okay?" Her tone was gentle, polite. "Unesfornash." But no one in the room missed how she said "we," as if drawing a quiet line between those who understood and those who weren't meant to. Jonas nodded, kept cleaning, but his eyes no longer followed the floor. During break, he entered the staff lounge to make tea. As the kettle boiled, 2 maintenance workers chatted nearby. Jonas is weird, always circling the Egypt wing, like he understands that gibberish. If he did, he'd be a curator, not a janitor. Right. Yeah. Probably watches too many mummy movies. Thinks he's some professor. They chuckled. Jonas heard every word through the thin wall. He didn't get angry, just quietly turned off the kettle, picked up his empty mug, and went back to finish cleaning the exhibit. That night, after everyone had left, Jonas walked past the data archive room where thousands of scanned inscriptions were stored. Every file was numbered. No one knew one of those files included a translation titled Jonas M. Never opened, never reviewed, because they didn't know who he was. He looked through the hat through the glass. The white-blue LED lights cast a sharp glow across his face. In his eyes, there was no sadness, only stillness. No one pronounced his name right. No one asked what he thought. And when he stared at the ancient glyphs, they just assumed it was the odd habit of a lonely old man. A tiger doesn't need to roar to bite. Sometimes, it only needs you to forget it has fangs. After that day, Jonas grew even quieter. Not because he was hurt, but because he realized in this place, loneliness didn't need to be inflicted. It simply existed. A week after the incident with the undecipherable tablet, the museum held a press conference. Scholars spoke. Kia. The media arrived. The speaker list had been set in advance. Jonas stood 20 meters away, behind a black curtain. No one invited him in. No one stopped him either. And he didn't step forward. As the experts explained the mystical significance of the Egyptian symbols, Jonas listened carefully, catching every mispronounced word. He didn't laugh. He simply bowed his head and wiped a coffee stain off the stone floor right beneath the feet of the scholar who had just misnamed an ancient god. One afternoon, while assistants were filing archive folders, Jonas passed by the storage room. A reference sheet of hieroglyphic categories had been pinned to the wrong spot. He reached out gently to adjust it. Just then, a young staff member walked in. She paused. Her eyes didn't react, but her footsteps slowed. Oh, are you looking for something? I just noticed this section's out of order. No worries, we'll take care of that. Her smile wasn't cold, but it didn't need to be warm. It was enough to say, we'll handle the parts with writing. Jonas stepped back, lowered his head, walked away in silence. Moments later, after he'd gone, the young woman removed the sheet and quietly repinned it exactly where he had pointed. At lunch, the break room buzzed with chatter. People ate quickly, joked, gossiped about films, deadlines, and their private lives. Jonas sat at the far end, facing the wall. His meal was wrapped in a brown paper bag, still warm. Each time someone entered, they greeted one another. No one greeted Jonas, not intentionally, but his name wasn't part of their habit. Another afternoon, as a group of interns studied a stele, Jonas approached, pointing to the bottom line and said softly, "That's not a name. It's a compound verb used in ceremonial texts." A curator turned around, offering a polite smile. "Thank you, Minarm. Can you, sir? But the group's got guidance already. We'll reach out if we need anything." She turned away before he could respond. Jonas stood there for a few more seconds, then quietly returned to his floor work. At night, when everyone had left, Jonas walked the Egyptian corridor. The soft golden lights cast long shadows behind him on the tiled floor. Each footstep echoed sharp, solitary. He stopped before the bas-relief of the opening of the mouth ritual, where an ancient priest restores the soul by reawakening the power of speech. Jonas stared into the stone eyes of the priest. His hand clenched the mop handle, not out of anger, but because in that image, he saw himself. A man trying to resurrect what had been buried in a room no one was listening to. Day after day, he kept mopping, kept showing up on time, kept sipping ginger tea. Every time he entered a room, people paused their conversation, then resumed in quieter tones. Every time he studied an artifact, people walked away. No one yelled, no one insulted, but the world had no place for him to belong. Discrimination doesn't always speak. Sometimes it simply stands where there's no space for you at all. It was a rainy evening. Cold drizzle tapped softly against the museum's glass roof, creating a steady rhythm like fingers knocking gently on the lid of a stone coffin. The museum had closed hours ago, but one light remained on in the preservation wing, a pale LED beam, casting cold white hues over the statues, making them seem as if they'd just awakened in the middle of the night. Jonas stayed late. No one had asked him to. No one knew. He was cleaning near the damaged artifacts section, items yet to be inventoried, unrestored, tucked deep into the museum's blind spots. No visitors came there. No name tags. No cameras. No glory. Only shattered memories no one had patience to reassemble. In a dusty corner beneath a warped wooden shelf, Jonas spotted a small stone fragment. No label. No ID code. Untouched by any hand. A broken shard with only a few jagged symbols left, layered atop each other like a mess of forgotten words. He knelt down. The beam from his flashlight skimmed across the surface. Moist air left a soft mist. He wiped the stone gently. The etching sharpened into view. Jonas furrowed his brow, not because he didn't understand it, but because he knew it too well. It was the same phrase his father had once written on the small paper Jonas carried every day. The soul does not vanish, it only sleeps in a forgotten name. That paper had stayed with him since age 7. Red ink on yellowed paper. On the last day he saw his father, he'd watched him use a reed pen to carve that same line into a clay tablet. When no one remembers the true name of a soul, his father had said, that soul will sleep forever. Jonas whispered the phrase again, slowly, silently. A draft passed through the wall crack, a cold shiver of wind, but he didn't flinch. Just then, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Soft. As if not to disturb the moment. A wind dark Clara, the new research student, the only one who ever greeted him by his real name. She meant to walk past, but paused when she saw him reading. Not reading like someone learning, not reciting from memory, but reading like someone hearing a language his blood had never stopped speaking. She stayed still and listened. After a while, Jonas stopped. He turned around. The flashlight beam sliced across his face, revealing deep lines and a warm, fractured gaze. You recognize that script? He asked, his first words to anyone outside his routine. Clara nodded. I came across it once in a damaged inscription, but no one could confirm its meaning. It's not wrong, he said. It's just missing the last line. She opened her phone, took notes, but not in haste. Not with excitement. She turned to him. Where did you learn this? Jonas kept his eyes on the stone. From a place they don't teach anymore. No one knew how long they spoke. But from that night on, Clara began passing through the artifact wing more often. Not out of curiosity, because she understood some answers live in silences the world has forgotten. Turning points don't always come with fireworks. Sometimes they happen when someone simply stops and listens to what everyone else has ignored. That morning, the museum opened earlier than usual to prepare for a press event, the official unveiling of the translated inscription. The main hall was spotless. The display table gleamed, and the overhead lights cast a cold, ceremonial white glow from all four corners. Jonas entered from the back, still carrying his mop, his rubber shoes damp from morning mist. But this time his gaze didn't stay on the floor. A cluster of scholars stood in a crescent around the glass case that held the tablet. At the center stood Dr. Hall, a well-known academic famous for his bold and assertive interpretations. Clara was nearby, standing off to the side, holding a folder, her eyes briefly meeting Jonas's, but not overtly. Hall cleared his throat and raised his notes. As you'll see, the final line of this inscription, as analyzed by our team, describes the ritual erasure of the mortal ego, a necessary step in entering the priesthood of Horus. Jonas froze. He stood motionless in the aisle, about 6 meters away. He knew that line well. It didn't mean erasure, but it meant calling back a forgotten name. Foreign one. A small difference, but one that completely reversed the soul of the text. He inhaled deeply. Cold air crept through his collar. His fingers tightened around the mop handle. Then his voice rose, not loud, not shaky, but so clear the room forgot to breathe. Excuse me, that line doesn't carry that meaning. Everyone turned. The silence stretched like wire. Eyes scanned him, curious, startled, defensive. Doctor. Hall narrowed his brow. Who said that? Atsuri Tudor. Jonas stepped forward, nodded once. Yawadina turn. I did. Time thickened. Clara glanced his way. Someone straightened their posture. A senior scholar tilted his head. Hall spoke slowly. You are a janitor here, correct? Jonas nodded. I was a graduate student in ancient linguistics. His voice was steady. No defiance. No apology. Hall chuckled soft. Not loud, but enough to tighten the room. Lovely. So now anyone can contribute to ancient translations. There was awkward laughter. No one met eyes. A younger scholar, clearly uncomfortable, spoke up. Mr. Jonas translated an undeciphered passage from 10 years ago, and it was accurate. Hall turned toward him, gaze sharp, then faced Jonas. So you're saying the entire review panel is wrong? Jonas answered plainly. I'm not saying that. I'm just reading it right. Clara stepped forward, her tone calm. His notes match original cross-reference materials. The verb used is rekindle, not erase. Hurrying. Someone opened their phone, pulling up a glyph dictionary. Another flipped through a manuscript. No one spoke, but everyone knew the room had just shifted off-center. Hall didn't respond. He simply closed his binder and walked away. Jonas said nothing more. He gently leaned the mop back against the wall, then quietly exited, leaving behind a silence no one dared break. That afternoon, he didn't enter the break room, didn't brew tea. He stood by the hallway window, watching the rain trail down the glass. Not sad, not triumphant, just empty, as if he'd finally said what needed saying for 20 years, and no one quite knew how to answer. Not every act of defiance needs fists. Some answers only require perfect precision. 2 days after the press conference, an internal museum email arrived. It was from Clara. Subject supplementary translation, tablet 472A. Attached was a PDF 12 pages. Concise, precise, no embellishment. The author was listed as J. No one knew exactly who J was, but within 30 minutes, the file made its way to senior scholars. And just 6 hours later, an emergency meeting was called. When Jonas walked into the archive wing as usual that morning, he noticed the Egyptian exhibit door was unlocked. Inside, the research team stood around the stone tablet. Clara looked up. Her eyes were bright, not with excitement, but with the quiet certainty of someone who knew what was beginning. That afternoon, the museum director personally requested to speak with Jonas. No cameras, no witnesses? Could you tell us how you managed to read the entire inscription? The way you handled the verb structure, no one's tried that approach. Jonas didn't respond right away. He looked out the window. The rain hadn't stopped. I didn't handle it, he said. I just remembered. In the following week, Clara invited Jonas to join the epigraphy comparison team, a group usually reserved for senior professors. At first, he declined, but then he accepted, not to prove anything, but because, for the first time in years, he was allowed to touch the language he once called his blood. On the first day, the team gathered around an untranslated inscription. Jonas didn't use paper, no laptop. He looked at the black and white photograph, squinted slightly, and said, "This isn't administrative script. It's a curse, and it's not written in order." Everyone stopped. One scholar checked dynasty maps. Another cross-referenced root forms. It all matched. Word spread quickly, quietly. No presso sur. No headlines. Just scholars whispering about Jonas, the man decoding what others wouldn't even attempt. Not with AI, not with language models. Just memory, intuition, and a kind of persistence no algorithm could replicate. Clara later wrote in the museum's internal log, Jonas doesn't translate texts. Jonas releases them from being forgotten. One day, an old professor requested a private meeting with Jonas. He had once rejected Jonas's doctoral proposal nearly 2 decades ago. No one knows what was said, but after the meeting, the professor stood silently outside the door for nearly 2 minutes, then quietly walked away. True power isn't what you show. It's what no one dares deny, once it finally speaks. The museum held a small internal ceremony. No press, no cameras, just an event titled Recognition of Special Contribution. Clara was the speaker. If for us, you mind to want. She spoke about a forgotten translation, about quiet evenings spent with a man who'd never stood at a podium, but understood the stones better than anyone else. Jonas was invited to sit in the front row. His seat had a name tag. For the first time in 17 years, his name was printed correctly. Jonas Emim. Not John. Not misspelled. Not mistaken. After the ceremony, a group of students gathered around him. They asked where he had studied, why he chose janitorial work. They called him teacher not as a title, but as respect. Jonas didn't lecture. He told stories about nights when his father taught him ancient glyphs by oil lamp, about dreams in a language no one remembered, and about a phrase he'd kept in his heart for years. When a soul's name is forgotten, it sleeps. But if someone speaks it true, it wakes. A week later, the museum released an updated internal record. It clearly stated, first accurate translation of Tablet 472A, Jonas M. Role research collaborator. Temporary. No academic title. No degree. But his name stood beside the institution's top scholars. No one objected. Dr. Hall didn't attend the ceremony, but he sent a private letter of apology. It wasn't long. Just one line. I was wrong, and I underestimated what I didn't understand. Jonas didn't reply. He folded the letter and placed it inside an old book, one he'd left unfinished 20 years ago. A month later, Jonas was invited to serve as an honorary advisor for the epigraphy team. This time, he didn't decline. Not for prestige, but because he knew if he didn't step forward, someone else, with knowledge and heart, might again be left behind. That weekend, Jonas returned to the data archive. The same room, the same catalog board he was once stopped from correcting now bore a small label. Glyph Advisor, J. Enarim Enen. He didn't smile broadly. He simply touched his name and walked on. Sometimes redemption doesn't need applause, just quiet acknowledgement from the very place that once turned its back. Recognition that comes late is still a form of light. After everything, Jonas still came to the museum every morning. He no longer carried a mop. Now, he brought an old leather satchel inside were facsimiles of inscriptions, a small notebook, and a brass-nibbed pen. No one saw him as the cleaner anymore. They didn't rush to label him either. They simply nodded, made space as he passed, and listened when he spoke. One afternoon, Jonas stood silently before a displayed stone. A young student quietly stepped beside him, waiting. After a few minutes, Jonas pointed to a tiny symbol. This mark often gets skipped, but it's the stress glyph. Without it, the sentence reads wrong. Just that. Then he walked away. The student later checked and found the existing translation was off. Clara continued her research. But whenever a question about ancient texts arose, she always asked Jonas first before consulting any database. Not because he was smarter than machines, but because he lived inside the language, not outside of it. When asked if he wanted to teach, Jonas replied, I don't teach. I just retell what people once forgot. One early autumn morning, a new exhibit opened, Languages That Died. Jonas was invited to give the opening address. He stepped up. Same calm eyes, powerless in posture, powerful in presence. He didn't speak about himself. He spoke about how a single misread glyph could bury the soul of an entire civilization. At the end of his talk, the hall stood in applause. Jonas bowed, but he didn't thank them. He simply said, Don't clap for me. Clap for those who are still being misunderstood. Because there are so many other people like Jonas, quiet, iwatiantum, overlooked, but carrying within them an entire archive waiting to be named correctly. And if you've ever felt like one of them, don't stay silent forever. Speak up, or at the very least, listen to those who've waited a lifetime to be heard. This story was told by Unveiled Wealth, where we rediscover the people and truths the world once buried. If you want to continue uncovering silent power like Jonas's, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because sometimes the right story at the right moment can awaken something inside you that's been asleep far too long.